The raid was supposed to be the difficult part. Emmett Carter had repeated that to himself while the unmarked vans rolled toward the old social club on Mercer Street, where detectives believed illegal gambling money had been moving through private rooms for years. At 28, Emmett was still new enough to feel every instruction twice. Once when Sergeant Harris gave it, and again when his own nerves repeated it back. He had made arrests before. He had handled fights, drunk drivers, domestic calls, and one man who tried to escape through a bathroom window that was far too small for him. But this was his first major coordinated operation, and the name attached to it had been in police briefings since before Emmett joined the department. Lucian D'Angelo, 35. Gambling. Money laundering. Protection money. No murder charge, no conviction for serious violence, but enough influence that people lowered their voices when they discussed him. When the officers forced open the upstairs door, Emmett expected shouting, bodies moving, maybe someone reaching for a weapon. Instead, he found overturned chairs, abandoned cards, half-finished drinks, and one man sitting alone at the end of a long table. Lucian wore a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. His phone, wallet, and keys sat in a straight line in front of him. His hands rested flat on the table. He looked at the officers coming through the door, then at Emmett, and his expression did not change. "Hands where we can see them," Harris ordered. Lucian lifted them without complaint. "Stand up." "Turn around." Again he obeyed. That should have made the room easier. It did not. Everything about the situation felt too prepared. Emmett moved forward when Harris pointed at him. "Carter, cuff him." Emmett pulled the restraints from his belt and stepped behind Lucian. Up close, he noticed details the file photograph had flattened. A small pale line near Lucian's left eyebrow, a faint trace of cologne under the stale smell of smoke from the club, the controlled rise of his shoulders as he breathed. Emmett caught Lucian's right wrist, secured the first cuff, then tried to close the second. The hinge caught against the angle of Lucian's hand. Emmett adjusted it. It caught again. Heat crawled up the back of his neck. Lucian glanced over his shoulder, just enough to see him. "Take your time," he said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere." Emmett's jaw tightened. "Face forward." "Of course, Officer Carter." Emmett stopped for half a second. His name was stitched over his pocket. There was nothing mysterious about Lucian knowing it, but the calm way he said it made it sound personal. Emmett fixed the angle and closed the cuff. "Done." Lucian looked toward the empty room. "I noticed." The corner of his mouth moved. Emmett almost smiled back and hated himself for it. The only real confusion came from the kitchen. An officer pushed a thin young employee into the hall with the others. The kid could not have been more than 19. His breathing came too fast, and when someone told him to put his hands on the wall, he stared without understanding. Emmett stepped closer. "Hey, look at me." The kid did. "Do you work here?" A fast nod. "Kitchen?" Another nod. "How long?" 3 weeks. "I just wash dishes." "I swear." Emmett checked the staff list clipped near the service entrance and found the same name. He called a detective over rather than treating panic like guilt. 10 minutes later, the employee was sitting downstairs with water instead of standing among the detained gamblers. When Emmett returned to the hallway, Lucian was watching him. Not staring at the guns or the detectives carrying boxes of records. Watching him. "What?" Emmett asked. Lucian shook his head once. "Nothing." Harris guided Lucian toward the stairs. Lucian went without resistance. As he passed Emmett, he said, "Good call with the kid. Don't make this friendly." "I wasn't." Lucian's voice stayed low. "I was being accurate." At the station, the situation became stranger. Lucian asked for an attorney, then told the detectives he intended to cooperate. He did not demand immunity. He did not claim every document in the club belonged to someone else. He gave them the name Marco Bellini and told them where to find records that had not been stored at the club. Emmett was brought into the first interview only long enough to confirm the arrest sequence and Lucian's condition when taken into custody. Harris remained beside him. Lucian sat across the table with his hands cuffed in front of him, his lawyer on one side and a financial crimes detective on the other. "You stayed after everyone else cleared out," the detective said. "Why?" Lucian looked at the table, then lifted his eyes. Because running would have made the next part harder. Which part? Leaving. The detective leaned back. You expect us to believe you suddenly developed a conscience? No, Lucian's answer came fast. I expect you to verify what I give you. He explained that he had spent nearly 2 years cutting himself out of businesses tied to Marco, closing accounts, selling interests, and separating legitimate property from illegal money. He admitted that the process had been slow because he had been trying to avoid leaving vulnerable employees or relatives trapped in the fallout. I broke the law, he said. I'm not asking anyone to pretend otherwise. But Bellini is rebuilding what I shut down, and he is less careful about who gets hurt. Emmett listened without trying to decide whether he believed him. That was not his job. Still, Lucian did not sound like a man inventing innocence. He sounded like someone who had already accepted that the cleanest exit available was still going to hurt. When the formal questions ended, Harris stood first. Emmett pushed back his chair. Lucian looked at him. Officer Carter. Emmett stopped. Harris gave him a warning glance, but Lucian only said, I meant what I said upstairs. About what? The kid. Lucian rubbed one thumb over the edge of the cuff. Everyone entered that room looking for the most dangerous person. You noticed the person who was scared. Emmett kept his face neutral. That's part of the job. It should be. Lucian's eyes held his for another second. Your hands were shaking when you cuffed me. High sight. D'Angelo. Emmett felt his neck heat again. They were not. Then I apologize. Lucian's expression said he did not believe a word of that apology. Emmett turned toward the door. You're enjoying this. A little. Emmett stepped into the hallway. Before Lucian could see the smile, he finally lost control of. The door shut behind him. Harris looked over. Don't confuse charm with character. Emmett nodded. I know. He did know. The problem was that he had expected Lucian's charm. He had not expected the honesty underneath it to feel more dangerous. Back at his desk, Emmett wrote the arrest report twice before he was satisfied with it. He removed every impression that did not belong in an official record. Calm voice, amused eyes, the strange sense that Lucian had been studying him as carefully as the police studied Lucian. On paper, the arrest became clean and ordinary. Emmett stared at the final page and knew the night had been neither. Emmett expected the strange interest to fade once he returned to ordinary patrol work. Instead, small moments kept bringing Lucian back into his head. A man at a traffic stop complained loudly about being treated like a criminal, and Emmett remembered Lucian calmly admitting that he was one. A rookie in another unit fumbled a set of cuffs, and Emmett nearly laughed at the memory of Lucian telling him to take his time. He did not romanticize the case. He had read enough reports to know that Lucian had made money from illegal gambling and intimidation, and that people with money could make themselves look cleaner than they were. That was exactly why the contradiction bothered him. Lucian had not asked to be forgiven. He had not performed innocence for Emmett. He had simply stayed in the room when he could have run. 2 weeks later, Harris found Emmett finishing paperwork after shift and dropped a folder onto the neighboring desk. Financial Crimes says D'Angelo's information checked out. Emmett kept writing. Okay. Harris watched him. That all? What do you want me to say? Nothing. I'm checking whether you're building a tragic romance in your head. Emmett looked up. He's a criminal I arrested once. Good answer. Harris walked away. Emmett looked back at the report in front of him and muttered. Also, not tragic. He immediately hated himself for saying it aloud. The case left Emmett's hands almost immediately. Financial Crimes took the records. Federal investigators became involved, and Emmett went back to patrol. That should have ended the connection. For several weeks, it almost did. He saw Lucian's name in internal notices, and then stopped seeing it altogether. He heard that Lucian had signed a cooperation agreement that included restitution and probation, while larger financial charges were reviewed. Nothing about it made him innocent, and nothing erased the years he had spent profiting from illegal operations. Emmett respected that the agreement did not pretend otherwise. Then, on a Saturday afternoon, he walked into a neighborhood boxing gym as part of a police community program and found Lucian D'Angelo holding pads for a 12-year-old boy who kept dropping his left hand. Emmett stopped inside the doorway. Lucian looked past the boy, saw him, and nearly took a glove to the face. The boy laughed. "You said never look away." Lucian lowered the pads. "You caught me breaking my own rule." His eyes returned to Emmett. "Apparently that happens around certain people." Emmett folded his arms. "Still practicing that charm?" "No. That one was spontaneous." The gym looked nothing like the places Emmett associated with Lucian's old reputation. The floor was worn. The heavy bags had been patched more than once. Names were written in marker on borrowed headgear. Lucian moved through the room without anyone acting afraid of him. A woman at the front desk yelled that he had forgotten to order paper towels again, and he yelled back that he was being publicly humiliated. Emmett had to look away to hide another smile. During a beginner demonstration, one of the coaches asked for a volunteer. Emmett made the mistake of raising his hand. 10 minutes later, Lucian caught his wrist before he hit the bag. "Stop." "What?" "Your wrap." Lucian turned Emmett's hand over. "Too loose here." He began undoing it, fingers working carefully around Emmett's knuckles. The contact was practical, but the room suddenly felt smaller. "You always correct police officers in public?" Emmett asked. "Only when they're about to injure themselves." "Very civic-minded." "I'm changing my image." Lucian tightened the wrap and smoothed it across Emmett's wrist. His thumb stayed there a fraction longer than necessary. Emmett noticed. Lucian noticed him noticing. Neither moved immediately. Then Lucian stepped back. "Try now." Emmett hit the bag harder than he intended. During the rest of the community program, Emmett saw enough to make the gym harder to dismiss as image management. Lucian knew every teenager by name. He noticed when one boy kept favoring his left shoulder and quietly moved him to footwork drills instead of letting him prove something by getting hurt. When a mother arrived 20 minutes late and apologized repeatedly, Lucian told her the kid had helped clean equipment and acted as if the favor had gone both ways. None of it looked staged. No cameras were there. No reporter was waiting outside. At one point, Emmett found Lucian in the supply closet arguing with a broken printer. "Powerful crime figure defeated by office equipment," Emmett said from the doorway. Lucian pressed a button again. "If you tell anyone, I'll deny it." That sounded almost like a threat. It was a request for discretion. Emmett stepped inside and opened a paper tray. A torn sheet was jammed under the roller. He pulled it free. The printer immediately came back to life. Lucian stared at him. "I'm reconsidering our entire power dynamic." "There is no power dynamic. You fixed the printer. Try to stay humble." Lucian's smile remained after Emmett walked back into the gym. That small, ridiculous moment did more to unsettle Emmett than the arrest had. It was much easier to keep a dangerous reputation at a distance than a man who could lose an argument to a printer and laugh about it. After the program ended, Emmett helped stack folding chairs while Lucian locked the equipment room. On one wall hung an older photograph of two men in boxing gloves, both younger, both grinning at the camera. One was Lucian. "Your brother?" Emmett asked. Lucian stopped beside him. "Adrian." The smile he had worn all afternoon disappeared, but he did not shut down. This place was his first. "Mine later." "Was it connected to your other businesses?" "Never." Lucian looked at the photograph. "He made me promise. Whatever I became outside these doors, I kept this place clean." He did not turn the story into a confession. He simply said that he and Adrian had spent years arguing about Lucian's choices. They had been trying to repair things when Adrian died suddenly from a heart condition no one knew he had. After that, Lucian said, "I started closing doors I should never have opened." Emmett studied him. "So the arrest wasn't the beginning." "No." Lucian finally looked at him. "It was the point where I stopped leaving myself an exit back." Someone called Lucian from the office. He stepped away, then glanced back. "For the record, your right hook is terrible." Emmett stared at him. "You waited until after the sad story to say that?" "Timing matters." Lucian did not ask Emmett out that day. That mattered. He waited until his cooperation terms had been finalized and Emmett had no professional connection to the investigation. Then Emmett's phone buzzed after a late shift. Unknown number. "Coffee?" No handcuffs this time. Emmett stared at the message, laughed once under his breath, and waited 5 minutes before replying because answering immediately felt like surrender. The diner Lucian chose was open all night and had terrible lighting. That helped. There were no expensive cars outside, no private room, no people hovering near Lucian. He wore jeans and a plain jacket and complained when the waitress poured sugar into his coffee by mistake. I thought feared criminal figures drank everything black, Emmett said. Lucian pushed the cup away. That is propaganda. So what do you drink? Coffee with enough milk to disappoint my ancestors. Emmett laughed. The conversation moved easily once they stopped pretending it was not a date. They talked about Emmett's work without discussing Lucian's case, about the cooking competitions Emmett watched when he could not sleep, about Lucian's old jazz records, about why Emmett thought most jazz sounded like several talented men refusing to agree on a song. Lucian laughed hard enough that the waitress looked over. Emmett did one thing before agreeing to see Lucian again. He checked where the professional line actually stood. He did not ask anyone for permission to date a man. That was not the issue. He asked Harris whether any active assignments still connected him to Lucian. Harris gave him a long look over the top of his computer. Financial Crimes owns it. You don't access the file, you don't carry messages, and you don't discuss anything you hear from him that belongs in an investigation. Why? Emmett kept his face straight. General curiosity. You are terrible at lying. Emmett sighed. Harris leaned back. Carter, I'm not your father. I'm telling you the same thing I'd tell anyone. Don't let personal feelings turn into police work. They won't. Then keep the walls clear. Emmett nodded. That conversation made the next date easier because he no longer had to pretend the complication did not exist. When Lucian asked whether Emmett was uncomfortable being seen with him, Emmett answered honestly. I'm uncomfortable with your history. That's different. Lucian went still. You're allowed to be. I know. Emmett met his eyes. And you're allowed to show me what you do with the life you have now. Lucian did not offer another defense of his past. He only said, that seems fair. For Emmett, that answer mattered more than an apology polished for effect. The diner was not the only place where Emmett started noticing how different Lucian was without an audience. On their next evening together, they walked 3 blocks from the gym to a small neighborhood restaurant because Lucian refused to drive after Emmett accused him of treating every destination like a business meeting. Lucian held the door for an elderly couple, complained about the restaurant's music, and stole one of Emmett's fries after insisting he did not want any. That was mine. It was unattended. It was on my plate. Poor security. Emmett nudged his ankle under the table. Lucian grinned. The conversation eventually turned more serious when Emmett asked whether Lucian missed the money. Sometimes, Lucian admitted, not because I need more, because money made problems fast to solve. And now I have to ask people, wait. Compromise. Very humiliating. Emmett smiled, but Lucian continued. The hard part isn't losing power. It's realizing how many ordinary skills power let me avoid learning. Emmett thought about the broken printer. You mean like asking for help? Lucian gave him a flat look. I knew you were going to bring that up. Emmett laughed. When they left, Lucian reached for his hand, hesitated, then let his fingers brush Emmett's before pulling back. Emmett noticed the restraint. He also noticed that he wanted the hand to return. A second coffee became dinner the next week. Dinner became Lucian waiting outside the gym one evening because Emmett had texted that his shift ended early. Emmett noticed that Lucian was good at listening and bad at casual planning. He could negotiate a legal agreement with 6 lawyers in the room, but he spent 10 minutes deciding whether suggesting dinner sounded too formal. You're nervous, Emmett said finally. Lucian looked offended. I have been threatened with prison by people less observant than you. That wasn't a denial. Lucian leaned against the hood of his car. Fine. I'm nervous. Why? Because men I used to deal with couldn't reject anything I actually cared about. The humor left Emmett's face. Lucian continued, quieter. You can? Emmett stepped a little closer. I keep showing up. I noticed. The space between them narrowed without either man touching. Emmett could have ended the wait then. He wanted to. Instead he said, Good night, Lucian. Lucian smiled like he understood exactly what Emmett was doing. Good night, Officer Carter. I'm off duty. I know. Emmett walked away with his pulse too fast and the certainty that the next time they stood that close, pretending was going to become difficult. The pressure from Marco arrived without gunfire or dramatic threats. A supplier canceled a gym order after years of reliable business. Two parents asked whether the rumors about Lucian's criminal history meant the program was safe. Then, one Thursday evening, a man Emmett did not recognize walked into the gym while teenagers were still training and started talking loudly about Lucian being a police informant. Lucian told him once to leave. The man smiled and stepped closer. What happened to you? You used to know how to make people listen. Lucian's face changed. Not much, but Emmett saw the old instinct arrive. Shoulders still, jaw set, hands loose at his sides. The man shoved him once. A few of the teenagers stopped training. Emmett, who had come by after shift, moved from the wall, but did not interfere. This was Lucian's choice. Lucian looked at the man, then at the room around him. He stepped back. Get out. The man laughed. Lucian did not touch him. One of the coaches called security from the building office, and the visitor left after realizing he was not going to get the reaction he wanted. Lucian stood in the same place until the door closed. His hands shook once before he put them in his pockets. Later, after everyone went home, Emmett found him sitting on the edge of the ring. You could have hit him, Emmett said. Lucian stared at the floor. Yes, you wanted to. Very much. Emmett sat beside him. But you didn't. Lucian gave a short laugh without humor. Do I get a medal? No. You get to keep your probation. That pulled a real laugh from him. Silence settled. Emmett looked toward Adrian's photograph. Was he the first person who told you to get out? He was the first person I should have listened to. Lucian rubbed his hands together. He kept asking me to come here, have dinner, watch a fight, anything. I always had something more important. A meeting. A problem. Someone who needed to be reminded who was in charge. His voice stayed level, which made the next words hit harder. Then he died, and suddenly none of those important things knew my name the way he did. Emmett did not offer a line about forgiveness. He stayed there. Lucian looked at him after a while. That's when I started dismantling it. Slowly. Badly. But I started. Before you knew me. Long before. Emmett nodded. Good. Lucian frowned slightly. Good. I don't want to be the reason you became someone else. Emmett turned toward him. I'd rather be the reason you keep choosing the person you already decided to become. Lucian looked at him for so long that Emmett's chest tightened. He lifted one hand, stopped before touching Emmett's face, and let it fall again. That hesitation decided it. Emmett caught the front of Lucian's shirt and pulled him closer. The first kiss was brief only because both men were surprised by how fast restraint disappeared. Lucian's hand settled at Emmett's waist. Emmett kissed him again, slower this time, feeling Lucian exhale against his mouth before answering with more confidence. The weeks of teasing, close looks, unfinished goodnights, and deliberately careful distance finally had somewhere to go. When they separated, Lucian kept his forehead close to Emmett's. I was trying to be respectful. You were taking too long. That sounds like a complaint. It was. Lucian smiled, still breathing harder than before. Can I fix it? Emmett kissed him again instead of answering. When they finally left the gym, Lucian walked him to his car with one hand at the small of his back. Emmett sat behind the wheel afterward and laughed quietly at himself. The man he had once struggled to cuff had just managed to make him forget where he parked. The first kiss changed the rules, but it did not remove the awkwardness. The next morning, Lucian sent Emmett a message at 6:43. I am told there is an accepted period after a first kiss before a man is supposed to text. Emmett, already awake for shift, replied. Who told you that? Lucian, the internet. Emmett, never take relationship advice from the internet. Lucian, useful. Are we having dinner tonight? Emmett smiled into his coffee. That was how the next weeks went. They became more direct because pretending had finally become pointless. Lucian kissed Emmett goodbye outside the gym when no students were around. Emmett rested a hand on Lucian's knee under the table at dinner and enjoyed the rare sight of him losing his train of thought. One night, Lucian admitted he had spent 10 minutes choosing a shirt before their second date. Emmett laughed so hard that Lucian threatened to leave. "You negotiated with people who carried guns," Emmett said. "And a blue shirt frightened you? The shirt wasn't the problem." "What was?" Lucian looked at him. "Wanting you to like what you saw." The humor softened. Emmett reached across the table and touched his wrist. "I did." Lucian turned his hand and linked their fingers. They stayed like that while the restaurant staff stacked chairs around them. They did not rush from one kiss into a different kind of relationship overnight. The next few weeks mattered. Emmett stopped by the gym after shifts and sometimes found dinner waiting in the office because Lucian had finally learned that coffee did not count as food. Lucian spent one evening at Emmett's apartment watching a cooking show and argued with the judges like the contestants could hear him. They slept beside each other once after a late movie, fully clothed, Lucian's arm around Emmett's waist by morning. The physical tension stayed obvious, but so did everything else. Emmett learned that Lucian went quiet when worried instead of asking for help. Lucian learned that Emmett cleaned when stressed and could not leave a crooked picture frame alone. They disagreed about small things and did not treat disagreement like danger. By the time Emmett went to Lucian's apartment for dinner one Friday, neither man was pretending the attraction was only a joke anymore. The change showed most clearly in the quiet moments. Lucian no longer filled every silence with a joke, and Emmett no longer searched each pause for hidden motives. Sometimes they simply sat together after dinner, shoulders touching, each doing his own thing. That ease made the attraction stronger, not weaker. By the Friday Emmett stayed at Lucian's apartment, both men had already chosen each other in every way that mattered before they crossed the final physical line. That night, the kiss at Lucian's door lasted longer than either of them intended. Emmett felt Lucian stop once, giving him room to decide whether to continue, and answered by pulling him closer. They moved through the apartment without urgency, talking between kisses, laughing when Lucian nearly backed into a chair, then growing quiet when the mood shifted into something more vulnerable. What happened afterward was private, mutual, and unhurried. By morning, Emmett woke with Lucian beside him and understood that the important change was not what they had done, but how little guardedness remained between them. Lucian, usually awake first and already in control of the day, was still half asleep with one hand resting against Emmett's side. When his eyes opened, he looked almost embarrassed by how content he felt. "I don't know what happens next," he admitted. Emmett took his hand. "Then we learn." Lucian studied their joined fingers and smiled. "That's simple." "No," Emmett moved closer. "But simple and easy aren't the same thing. Want the complete version with extra scenes, deeper chemistry, extended moments, and full uncut 18+ intimacy? Watch it on Patreon through the link in the video description." The timing made what came next worse. 3 days later, Marco sent a message through Lucian's attorney requesting a private settlement discussion. The offer was simple. Lucian would stop providing additional cooperation, Marco would stop pressuring the gym, and several assets Lucian had walked away from would quietly return to him. Lucian refused before the meeting was over. That part was easy. The mistake came afterward. He did not tell Emmett. He told himself the same thing he had told himself for years whenever people close to him became involved in a problem. If he handled it alone, they would stay safe. For several days, he answered Emmett's messages normally and then went quiet whenever Marco's name came up through his attorney. Emmett noticed. Of course he noticed. One evening at the gym, after Lucian checked his phone and immediately turned it face down, Emmett waited until the last teenager left. "What are you not telling me?" Lucian looked up. "Nothing that changes us." That was not my question. The old instinct to manage the conversation flashed across Lucian's face. Emmett saw it, and his expression hardened. "Don't." Lucian exhaled. "Marco offered me a deal." Emmett listened without interrupting while Lucian explained the offer and his refusal. When Lucian finished, Emmett stood beside the ring with his arms folded. "So you said no?" "Immediately. And then decided I didn't need to know. I didn't want him using you to reach me. I'm not asking you to hand Marco my schedule." Emmett's voice stayed calm, which made Lucian look more uncomfortable than anger would have. "I'm asking why you think being with me gives you the right to decide what I'm allowed to understand about my own relationship." Lucian opened his mouth and closed it. Emmett stepped closer. You trusted me enough to let me see you without all the control. Now trust me enough to stay when the difficult part shows up. I was trying to protect you. I know. Emmett's expression softened, but not enough to release him from the point. That's the problem. You keep confusing protection with permission. Lucian looked away toward the empty gym. For years, fear had solved things quickly. Secrets had kept people useful. Control had made uncertainty smaller. None of those habits disappeared just because he had stopped making illegal money. You're right, he said. Emmett waited. Lucian looked back. I hate that you're right. That part one can live with. For Emmett, the argument about Marco mattered because it proved something attraction alone never could. Lucian did not punish him for disagreeing. He did not disappear for days, turn cold, or use his past as an excuse. The next evening he arrived at Emmett's apartment with takeout and said, before Emmett could ask, I spoke to my attorney. He has everything. Emmett let him inside. You didn't have to report to me. I know. Lucian set the bag on the counter. I wanted to tell you because it affects my life, and you are in my life. Emmett studied him. That sounded painful. Extremely good. Lucian rolled his eyes. Emmett caught his hand before he could move away. That is what I wanted. Not control over your decisions. A place in the truth. Lucian's expression changed. I'm learning the difference. Slowly. I was hoping for praise. You brought the wrong dinner for praise. Lucian looked inside the bag. You like this place? I do. I'm keeping you humble. They ate on the couch, and for once the problem did not need another dramatic conversation. Lucian had listened. Emmett had stayed. The relationship moved forward because both men had done something less exciting and more difficult than winning an argument. They had adjusted. The next morning, Lucian called his attorney and told him to forward the entire proposal, including the contact trail around it, to the financial investigators already handling Marco. He did not turn it into a heroic gesture. The investigators had their own case. Lucian's information only gave them another piece. More importantly, he told the gym staff what was happening in plain language. A few sponsors backed away. One parent removed his son from the program. Lucian expected the room to empty the way old rooms had emptied when his power disappeared. Instead, the head coach asked what equipment they needed to keep the youth classes running. The woman at the front desk started a community fundraiser without asking permission. 3 parents offered to help with transportation. Emmett stood near the office door and watched Lucian struggle to accept help without trying to repay everyone immediately. You're making a face, Emmett said later. People are being difficult. They're helping you. Exactly. Emmett laughed. Lucian looked around the gym at the patch bags and the kids finishing drills. I used to know how to keep a place open. Money. Fear. Leverage. Money. Lucian nodded toward the crowded room. This is harder. Because you can't control it? Because they can leave. Emmett slipped his hand into Lucian's. And they're staying. The weeks after Marco was charged were quieter. And that was where Lucian's change became easiest to see. He started asking instead of announcing. My attorney wants me at a meeting Thursday. Dinner Friday instead. The gym board wants to change the youth schedule. Can I complain to you for 10 minutes before I answer them? I want to put money into the upstairs program, but I'm trying not to decide everything alone. Look at this budget with me. Emmett teased him every time, but he noticed the pattern. Lucian was not becoming passive. He was learning that sharing a decision did not make him weak. Emmett had his own work to do. He stopped treating every disagreement as a test of whether dating Lucian had been a mistake. Some evenings one of them was tired and impatient. Sometimes Lucian forgot to call. Sometimes Emmett brought police stress home and needed an hour before he could talk. The relationship survived ordinary friction, which reassured Emmett more than any dramatic promise could. One Sunday morning they stood in the gym office arguing about where to put a second desk. Lucian wanted it against the far wall. Emmett said it blocked the cabinet. After 5 minutes Lucian stared at him and said, "This is what freedom looks like. Furniture arguments." Emmett moved the desk 6 inches. Apparently, Lucian laughed, kissed his temple, and helped him carry it. Marco's case ended without a dramatic final confrontation. Investigators already had records from multiple sources. Lucian's cooperation helped connect the last financial transfers and showed that Marco had attempted to obstruct the inquiry. Charges followed. Lawyers argued. Assets were frozen. The process took time and continued mostly in rooms Emmett never entered. That was how it should have been. Lucian completed the requirements of his own agreement, paid restitution, and stayed on probation. His past did not disappear, but it stopped deciding every hour of his future. The gym survived the rough months. Lucian turned the upstairs storage rooms into a modest training and job readiness space for older teenagers and adults trying to rebuild after trouble with the law. He did not put his name on the program. Emmett found that funny. You spent half your life making sure everyone knew your name. I'm experimenting with personal growth. Terrifying. Be supportive. Their relationship settled into the same mix of teasing and directness that had existed from the first arrest. Except now Lucian no longer had a table between them when he wanted to reach for Emmett. 18 months after the raid, Emmett came home from an early shift and found a narrow black frame sitting on the kitchen counter. He set down his keys and picked it up. Inside was a faded diner receipt. 2 coffees. 1 slice of pie neither man remembered ordering. At the bottom, Lucian had written in neat black ink, "No handcuffs required." Emmett stared at it until Lucian walked in carrying groceries. No, Lucian stopped. That is not the reaction I expected. You framed the receipt? It was our first date. It was coffee at 1 in the morning under fluorescent lights. Exactly. Romance. Emmett laughed and put the frame back down. The apartment they shared was not large, but it had slowly filled with evidence of both men. Emmett's work shoes beside Lucian's boxing bag, police exam books stacked next to old jazz records, grocery lists covered in arguments about whether cereal counted as dinner. Emmett was studying for the detective examination. Lucian's gym was finally stable enough that he occasionally took a full day off without calling anyone every 20 minutes. Lucian began putting groceries away. Emmett came up behind him and rested his chin briefly on his shoulder. You know you surrendered, right? Lucian turned his head. I'm sorry. The arrest. You keep telling people I arrested you like I hunted you across the city. You did arrest me. You were sitting at a table waiting. Still counts. You practically helped me with the cuffs. Lucian smiled. You needed support. Emmett shoved his shoulder. Lucian caught his hand and pulled him closer. The humor faded into something warmer. I didn't need support, Lucian said. Just not with the cuffs. Emmett looked at him. Lucian no longer said things like that as if they cost him something, and Emmett no longer felt the need to answer every serious moment with reassurance. He squeezed Lucian's hand once. Breakfast tomorrow? You have the morning off? Until noon. Lucian nodded. The diner? Emmett glanced at the framed receipt. Only if you promise not to steal another piece of paper for sentimental reasons. I promise nothing. Emmett kissed him once, quick and familiar. Their story had begun with a locked door, a pair of handcuffs, and 2 men who had every reason to distrust each other. What they built afterward was quieter than either of them expected. Work, arguments, ordinary mornings, chosen honesty. Lucian had once thought freedom meant escaping consequences. Emmett had once thought control meant never making a mistake. They had both been wrong. Freedom, in the end, was having a life neither man needed to run from, and someone beside him who was there because he had chosen to stay. If you enjoyed this story and want to experience the full version, you can find it on my Patreon. The Patreon edition is much longer and includes extra chemistry, additional relationship moments, extended scenes, and the full uncut 18+ raw intimacy that couldn't be included here on YouTube. The link is right below in the video description. Thank you so much for watching and staying with me until the end. Your support truly helps me continue creating more stories like this. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me what kind of story you'd love to hear next.